Hello, and welcome to Bradbury 100. Today is August the 22nd, which is Ray Bradbury's birthday. He would have been 106 if he was still alive. So join me now as we celebrate one of his most fantastical tales. So just a couple of weeks ago, the internet was full of web pages about Ray Bradbury's amazing prophecy for August 2026. And this was because he published a story years and years ago, back in 1950, which was set on August the 4th, 2026. Silhouettes and warnings on reading Ray Bradbury's There Will Come Soft Rains on the exact day when it's set. And I thought this was a highly appropriate one. This is from a website called AI Stopwatch, Dispatches from a World Racing to Extinction. This one really captures the idea of the end of the world. And this is one of the earlier ones to appear. And this came out on the 1st of August. And this was an article by Tyra Dam for the Dallas Morning News. And I'm quoted in this one. It's quite pleasing that this one got there before some of the other articles that I saw. So you can see it's August the 1st, but it's referring to August the 4th, the date in the story. Dam is the name of the writer of the article, by the way. It's not a typo for damn and tarnation. Ray Bradbury predicted we'd all die tomorrow. He wasn't wrong about all of it. Oh my God, Ray Bradbury predicts the future. Well, no, he wasn't predicting the future. It was a chapter in the Martian Chronicles. All of these raise this immediate question of how much science fiction is predictive. And of course, most science fiction is not predictive. It just gives the appearance of being predictive in order to make some comment about our present world, usually. So in this particular case, we're talking about a story, There Will Come Soft Rains, which is set in August 2026, simply because it's part of the Martian Chronicles chronology. Now, I've got a couple of Martian Chronicles books here, and I'm going to show you my really old and tatty. There we go. This is my old, ancient British edition of the Martian Chronicles from the days when it was called The Silver Locusts. Yes, you may not know that, folks, but it wasn't always called the Martian Chronicles here in the UK. It used to be called The Silver Locusts, and that's because the British publisher back in 1950-51 thought the idea of a book called The Martian Chronicles sounded a bit corny, a bit too science fiction-y, and they were trying to push Bradbury away from that in terms of where they thought his reputation should lie. And so they asked for a more poetic title, and The Silver Locusts is the title they chose. Anyway, if we look inside this book, the penultimate story in the Martian Chronicles, just looking for it here. And I have to confess, I've written on this copy of the book. This one I used as my note-taking copy when I was doing my PhD. So I'm afraid some naughty writing in a book. I don't usually write in books, but I kept one aside specifically for doing this. So there we go. And I don't know if you can see the date. Let me put it under the other camera. So there we go, August 2026, There Will Come Soft Rains. And it begins, in the living room, the voice clock sang, tick-tock, 7 o'clock, time to get up, 7 o'clock, as if it were afraid that nobody would. The morning house lay empty, the clock ticked on, repeating its sounds into the emptiness. 7-9, breakfast time, 7-9. And at the very bottom of the page there, today is August 4, 2026. It's a very well-known story, which has been adapted many times, such as this version by Wally Wood from Weird Fantasy magazine, or comic, back in January 1953, when the story was just 3 years old. There Will Come Soft Rains is about the last days on Earth following a nuclear war. The Martian Chronicles is set almost entirely on the planet Mars, which is where Earth people have gone and colonized. Just before the end of the book, A war breaks out on Earth, and people are summoned back to Earth. One of the stories in the Martian Chronicles has people calling out, "Come home, come home." And most of the people leave Mars and go home to be with their loved ones for what could be the end of the world. And it turns out it is the end of the world. There Will Come Soft Rains is the chapter that shows the aftermath. Everyone is dead. But on Earth, automated houses continue. And it's a really very poignant story about this automated house which continues to do its job right till its last breath, when everyone has gone, the dog has died, the people have died. And Wallywood's adaptation and the original story draw upon imagery from Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Ray would have been 24, 25 years old when the first atomic bombs were dropped at the end of the Second World War, and he would have read the articles that described the aftermath. And one of the prominent things that was known about Hiroshima is that there were shadows of people burned into buildings. So the people may have been vaporized, but their shadows remained. And if you Google Hiroshima images, you will find some really iconic photos from that horrible day back in 1945. So, was Ray predicting the future by setting this story in August 2026? Well, only in the sense that the whole of the Martian Chronicles is set in the future. But I'll have something to say about dates later on, because there's a little bit more to it than most of these news articles would have you believe. Now, the Martian Chronicles first appeared in 1950. It was Ray's first book from a mainstream publisher. He'd had one book out previously, which was Dark Carnival, which came from a small press. The Martian Chronicles was a breakthrough for him. This was a major New York publisher. And not only that, the book was to be a headlining work in Doubleday's brand new line, Doubleday Science Fiction. They stuck this, I was going to say label, but it's not actually a label. It's not a physical label, but it's a branding that they stuck on the cover of the book, Doubleday Science Fiction. And that came as a bit of a surprise to Ray, because he didn't consider the Martian Chronicles to be science fiction. He considered it to be fantasy. And the reason he considered it to be fantasy is because everything in it cannot happen in the real world. That's his view. His Martians walk around freely on the surface of the planet, not bothered by the fact that there's no oxygen. The Earth people who arrive walk around without spacesuits, without oxygen, and they seem to be perfectly fine. There are canals on Mars. All of this, in 1950, was known to be total fiction. This is not the real Mars as it was known in 1950. Ray knew that. So when Ray saw the label Doubleday Science Fiction, he took a sharp intake of breath, because he didn't consider that this was science fiction, and he feared that all his friends in the science fiction community would laugh at him for trying to pass his pure fantasy off as science fiction. So he wasn't happy with that label. Now, over the years, that's been misinterpreted. People have interpreted it as, oh, Ray Bradbury doesn't want to be thought of as a science fiction writer. He's ashamed of science fiction. Well, none of that is true. He, shortly after this, a few years after, published Fahrenheit 451, which he always claimed was science fiction. He was very happy for that book to be called science fiction. He was very happy to be something of a spokesman for the science fiction community. So there was no shame for him in being associated with science fiction. He thought it was a noble genre, and he was happy to speak for it. The only thing he objected to is calling something science fiction when it wasn't. And that was his problem with the Martian Chronicles being called Doubleday Science Fiction. I think There Will Come Soft Rains survives today as one of Ray's most reprinted stories because of the poetic language, because of the end of the world imagery, and because of this futuristic world that it presents. It's set in an automated house. Ray was always very clever with his machines and gadgets in his science fiction stories and his fantasy stories. He would never really tell you how things work. He would show you a rocket, and he wouldn't explain how you take a couple of gases and you bring them together in a chamber and out comes whatever. He didn't understand any of that. He wasn't interested in any of that. What he wanted to give you was the feeling of traveling on a rocket or standing near a rocket. So you'll, in his books, in the Martian Chronicles, when he describes rockets, you'll get a sense of how shiny they are, of the kind of noises they make, the cooling sounds of the metal contracting and expanding as the rocket cools, standing there on the ground. So he wouldn't go into detail, but he would try and capture the feeling of things. And the same is true with There Will Come Soft Rains. He gives you this automated house, but he doesn't tell you about how these robotic things work, how they're charged, how they're powered. He will simply say that robot mice come out of the wall, clean the floor, and go back in. So he'll call them mice. He won't even say robots like mice. He will actually call them mice. Now, in your mind, you might picture little tiny robots that look like mice, or in your mind, you may picture actual mice. Doesn't really matter. He's putting an idea across, and he wants something to happen in your mind. And boy, does it happen. Now, because of this, because of the way Ray deals with technology, by not going into detail and simply by talking about it in a poetic way, the stories survive. Some of the other science fiction and fantasy stories of the same era don't work very well because they're very clunky, because people are using technologies that by 1955 would have been obsolete. But nothing in a Bradbury story can ever be obsolete because none of it's real in the first place. It's all poetic, and the poetry survives even if the mechanisms are not viable. It's also, I think, very accessible. Like much of Bradbury's science fiction and fantasy stories, you don't need a deep knowledge of astronomy. You don't need to have any prior reading in the field of science fiction. Everything makes sense because the language is simple and yet poetic. And speaking of poetry, the story, of course, is based on a poem. It takes its title, and there is a long quotation within the story, from Sarah Teasdale's poem, There Will Come Soft Rains. And this is a poem which basically says, take a look at the world around you and imagine what would happen if we disappeared. And what she concludes basically is nothing.
There will come soft rains and the smell of the ground, and swallows circling with their shimmering sound, and frogs in the pool singing at night, and wild plum trees in tremulous white. Robins will wear their feathery fire, whistling their whims on a low fence wire. And not one will know of the war, not one will care at last when it is done. Not one would mind, neither bird nor tree, if mankind perished utterly. And spring herself, when she woke at dawn, would scarcely know that we were gone.
One of the recurring themes in all these articles that have appeared in the last few weeks saying Ray Bradbury predicted the future, a recurring theme is Ray Bradbury invented the smart home. Before smart homes were a thing, he was so visionary that he invented the smart home. He's got this intelligent house. It's just like Siri. It's just like Alexa. You can tell it what you want and it goes and does it for you. Well, yeah, Ray did create that, but he didn't create it out of whole cloth. There's actually a couple of traditions that he's drawing on there. The thing is, we've tended to forget the things that inspired him, and all we've got is his story. So it looks as if he's originated these ideas from nothing. But that's not the case. So I want to show you some of the sources for There Will Come Soft Rains. None of this takes away from Ray's genius. None of it takes away from his supreme abilities as a poetic fiction writer. But I think knowing some of the background can give you a deeper appreciation of how remarkable Bradbury's story is compared to some of its precursors. So, where does it all begin? Well, it's generally believed that the first smart house comes in a short story called The Machine Stops by E.M. Forster. You'll find the story in his book The Eternal Moment and Other Stories. It's also collected elsewhere. It's been reprinted many times over the years. And in fact, in this particular book, it takes pride of place. It's the first story in the collection. And the story is well worth reading. It was a very influential story, important in the history of science fiction. So here's a passage where we see the automated house, the smart house. There were buttons and switches everywhere, buttons to call for food, for music, for clothing. There was the hot bath button, by pressure of which a basin of imitation marble rose out of the floor, filled to the brim with a warm deodorized liquid. There was the cold bath button. There was the button that produced literature. And there were, of course, the buttons by which she communicated with her friends. The room, though it contained nothing, was in touch with all that she cared for in the world. Well, that last bit there, the bit about communication, makes it sound as if this house, this room, is what today we would call a smartphone. So E.M. Forster is not just anticipating the smart house, the automated house, the house that will do your bidding for you, but it's a center of communication. So E.M. Forster appears to be the first to present something like a smart house. If you look at science fiction stories after that, you'll see that it's a trope. It's something that science fiction writers return to again and again. So when Ray gives us a smart house in There Will Come Soft Rains, he is building on that trope. So there's one strand of where There Will Come Soft Rains comes from. Now the other strand is this kind of modernism that ran through Western culture from the 1930s onwards. You will see in the 1930s at for example, the Chicago World's Fair, there was a whole section of the World's Fair devoted to future housing, future homes. Now, this is the official guidebook of the 1933 World's Fair. I'm not saying this is the only place that would have considered the future of the home and new ways of doing things with house building and so on. But the reason this one is significant is that Ray went to the Chicago World's Fair of 1932-1933. That particular World's Fair bridged 2 years. And he visited it in one or both of those years. So he would have been exposed to these houses of the future. Inside the official guidebook from 33, and you can find this on the Internet Archive, by the way, the houses of the future were located just here. Number 77 is the area with these in, and there are a few different ones from different companies. And if we look in the table of content, probably the one that looks most promising for our purposes is the one called the House of Tomorrow. You've got the House of Tomorrow. Just above it, look, Design for Living. There's a little phrase, the House of Tomorrow. And the description of it here, a circular glass house. Now, immediately, that sounds science fiction to me, because we don't have round houses, we don't have glass houses, except out back where we grow our tomatoes. So a circular glass house incorporating possible indications of what the future may bring in housing. It's built around a central mast which contains all utilities. The exterior walls are of clear glass and there are no windows. Well, yeah, you wouldn't need any windows, would you, if your walls were made of glass? Privacy is obtained, in case you're wondering, by drapes and roller and Venetian blinds. I'm glad they thought of that. The most modern equipment available has been used, including everything from an airplane to electrically controlled doors. An airplane? Oh my God. The furniture is especially designed. The ground floor includes the airplane hangar in addition to the garage. The roof above forms an extensive deck terrace opening from the living room floor, and there is a similar deck around the drum-shaped solarium on the third floor. How futuristic is this? It's a house with 3 floors. The ventilation is all by filtered, washed, heated or cooled air, recirculated every 10 minutes. That would have been very handy this summer. Imagine living in a circular glass house in the heat waves that we've been having here in Europe the last few weeks. Yeah, you'd need that cooled air, I should think. There are no visible light fixtures as the necessary artificial light is indirect from hidden sources. There are no closets, but movable wardrobes are used. So it's not quite an automated house, but it's coming from this consideration of if we could start from scratch, if we could build a house for the future, what would it look like? Now, the guidebook doesn't really have any pictures of this house, but if you look on the internet, I think there are some knocking about. I wasn't able to pin down any that I thought were clear enough to really include today, but I'm sure there must be some out there. So, this is the other strand that I was talking about. From the 1930s, definitely, possibly earlier, but certainly from the 1930s, you get this strand of future houses. And it comes back again and again. Now, this is an image that I've put together. This is actually a kind of a composite. This one is AI assisted, but you'll find this in these future homes. So things like weather-sensitive windows, lighting control that responds to the weather conditions outside and the lighting conditions outside, sensors to open doors when people approach, automatic devices in the kitchen, most of which are built in, refrigerators that will really magic up any food you want whenever you want it. So all of this stuff bouncing around in various model houses of the 1930s and then into the 1940s. And some of this is captured on film. This is from, I think, 1943, so still in the war years. But interestingly, this piece of government filmmaking, which you could say is propaganda, or you could just say is about keeping people informed. This is about new materials that have been developed for the war, but which will have positive benefits after the war when, well, we'll be able to build houses out of new miracle materials such as plywood and laminates and plastics.
Laminated plastics, reinforced plywoods, roofing materials and curtain wall boards, which will...
So this is the kind of thing that you might see in a cinema. You might see footage like this as part of an evening's entertainment in a movie theatre. And Ray would certainly have seen this kind of stuff. He was an avid moviegoer. This is from the same film a little bit later on, and this interestingly shows the kitchen, which were always an important part of these future homes because they wanted to sell the ideas to the housewife. So this is a house with everything built in. It's even got a built-in waffle iron, you may have seen there, and a built-in rotisserie. Heaven only knows what you do when any of this goes wrong. You'd presumably have to rip out half of the kitchen to be able to replace your waffle iron. How you clean your waffle iron when it's built into the counter, who knows? But these are some of the wacky ideas that technologists and architects were coming up with in the 1940s. So none of this was obscure. And here's a piece from Life magazine, which had quite huge circulation. Kitchens of tomorrow may look like this. So again, this is 1943. That's the same kitchen as we just saw in that piece of film. It's got the heating pre-packaged foods device that's built into the kitchen. It's got the built-in toaster. How do you shake the crumbs out of a built-in toaster? The built-in mixing bowl and the waffle iron. There it is again. How on earth do you clean that? I do not know. Answers on a postcard, please. So Ray would have been exposed to all of this stuff. And then there are the cartoons. This is Doggone Modern, a Chuck Jones cartoon from 1939. And this one features an all-electric model home open for inspection, robots that come out of the wall and sweep up the mess. 11 years later, Ray's There Will Come Soft Rains has robot mice that come out of the walls and sweep up. Well, Chuck Jones was there first, back in 1939. Electric dishwashers, player pianos. Obviously, there was no concept of MIDI back in the day. If you wanted an automated piano, you'd have to have robotic hands play a real piano for you. Chuck Jones did another one of these in 1947, and that one's called House Hunting Mice.
Welcome to the super house, the house of tomorrow. Please feel free to try any of the modern appliances.
It's mechanical, see? Mechanical.
And rapidly associated with these Warner Brothers cartoons for these automated houses is this piece of music by Raymond Scott, which is called Powerhouse. Listen to this. You'll have heard this many times before. And then Robert McKimson's design for Leaving, which seems to call back to the Chicago World's Fair, where there was a Design for Living exhibit. And over at MGM, Tex Avery did a whole series of cartoons that had these kind of automated and mechanical things, starting with House of Tomorrow in 1949. Now, There Will Come Soft Rains was published in 1950. I think it's a fair bet that Ray would have written it at the end of 1949 or very early in 1950. He could very well have seen Tex Avery's House of Tomorrow. He certainly would have seen the Chuck Jones cartoons from earlier. So we've got science fiction dealing with automation as early as 1909, possibly earlier, but there we have the closest thing we have to a smart house in that early phase. We've got modernist approaches to house design from the 1930s onwards in exhibitions and in information films, propaganda films. You've got this whole string of cartoons inspired by all of this. So the automated house was very much in the air when Ray wrote There Will Come Soft Rains. So, as I say, none of this takes away from Ray's genius in the story. The story would not have survived if it were only about an automated house. It's the combination of the poetry, the imagery, the end of the world, the poignancy of the house serving its masters long after the masters have gone. All of that packaged together. It's the whole thing, the totality, that makes There Will Come Soft Rains one of the most reprinted short stories in history. But people keep saying, Ray Bradbury predicted the future, he predicted the smart house. No, no, no. He was warning us about the future rather than predicting. And he didn't invent the smart house. He was simply reusing a well-established trope. The thing is, most of the other stuff that led up to his writing of the story has it's not disappeared, but it's slipped out of our field of view, if you like. So all we've got left is Ray's story, which keeps getting reprinted. And I'm glad it does, because it's a great story and it's a great warning for us all. Look after the planet, because we may just kill ourselves. The planet may find a way of continuing without us. It doesn't care. So it's a great story. Now, I said I would come back to the question of dates. Ray Bradbury predicted the future. He said this would happen on August the 4th, 2026. Oh, did he? Interesting, that. Because the first appearance of There Will Come Soft Rains actually was not quite in the Martian Chronicles. More or less simultaneously, it appeared in Collier's magazine. But it was a slightly different version of the story. Collier's was a kind of a family magazine back in the 1950s. And here on May the 6th, 1950, we have the story listed as There Will Come Soft Rains, the short story. Now, the story is a short story, but they made it even shorter, or at least Ray made it shorter by submitting a shorter version of the story. It all fits on a single page of Collier's. But when is this story set? Well, let's have a look. This is how it begins, in Collier's. The house was a good house and had been planned and built by the people who were to live in it in the year 1980. Oh, interesting. I thought we were in 2026. The house was like many another house in that year. It fed and slept and entertained its inhabitants and made a good life for them. The man and wife and their 2 children lived at ease there, and lived happily, even while the world trembled. All of the fine things of living, the warm things, music and poetry, books that talked, beds that warmed and made themselves, fires that built themselves in the fireplaces of evenings, were in this house, and living there was a contentment. And then one day the world shook and there was an explosion, followed by 10,000 explosions and red fire in the sky and a rain of ashes and radioactivity, and the happy time was over. And we move on a little bit, and we hear the voice, the phonograph voice, saying, "Today is April 28th, 1985. Oh. So if Ray Bradbury was predicting the future, for this version of the story, he was predicting April 1985, which is 41 years ago now. We didn't make a big fuss about it then, did we? Because this version of the story is not the one that is known. This is the first appearance. This would have had a modest audience. Millions of people maybe read Collier's magazine, but only in North America. I'm sure many more people have read the story in its many repeat appearances since then. And it's not this version of the story that gets reprinted. The version that gets reprinted is the Martian Chronicles version, because that's become the standard text. And we know, of course, that in the Martian Chronicles or the Silver Locusts, he was predicting 2026, because that's where the story sits in the chronology within the book. The book begins, let me have a look, I think it's 1999. Yeah, the first story in the Martian Chronicles is January 1999, and the final story is October 2026. However, somewhere along the line, the dates of the Martian Chronicles were moved on by 30 years. And I have one such version of the Martian Chronicles here. So this is from William Morrow. So for a while, this is the standard hardcover in the US. I don't know whether it still is, to be honest. I haven't looked recently. Let me tell you when this version was printed. On the copyright page, it does say, "This edition of the Martian Chronicles has been updated and revised." So it's nice of them to at least mention that. This edition was first published in 1997, and this particular physical copy here was printed in 2006. Let's have a look at the dates, shall we? The Martian Chronicles. Remember, the first version of the book, the original version, began in 1999. This is the revised text, and it begins in January 2030. Oh, so the revised version begins later than that one ended. And let's take a look at There Will Come Soft Rains. Here we go. August 2057. Today is August 4th, 2057. Oh, so we've been celebrating Ray Bradbury predicting the future, but we've got to do it again in 30 years' time because the Martian Chronicles was updated and all the years were shoved on by 30 years. Now, people say, how did that happen? Why have people tampered with the text? Well, apparently it was Ray's doing, or at least Ray approved it back in 1997. And the reason for that is, think about being a publisher. In 1997, your very good book, The Martian Chronicles, which sells very well, is just 2 years away from being out of date. So somebody thought, let's push the years on a little bit, and then that gives us another 30 years, another generation of book buyers can enjoy this without thinking, oh, this is a bit dated. Now, of course, if The Martian Chronicles is fantasy, and Ray Bradbury maintained that this book is fantasy, then it doesn't matter what the years are in the book, because it's fantasy. It's a work of pure imagination. It's only a problem if the book is predictive, and it's not. It was never intended to be predictive. If anything, it's intended as a warning. Ray used to say, I do not predict the future, I prevent the future. So smart houses continue to be a thing, but very few people actually live in a smart house. The closest most of us come is a little bit of automation from Alexa, or maybe a remote-controlled switch so that they can turn on the Christmas lights and turn them off before they go to bed. So I don't know if smart homes ever really are going to be a thing. If Ray Bradbury was predicting the future, what was he predicting? He was predicting something that we still have not fully embraced and possibly never will. It's always great to celebrate the Martian Chronicles. We could have done that all along, of course. We could have picked out other dates from the Martian Chronicles. And which date would we have chosen? Did we celebrate Rocket Summer in January 1994? I don't know. Will we celebrate in October, which is the day that the Earth people, in the original editions of the Martian Chronicles, the day that the Earth people declare themselves to be the Martians now? I don't know if we'll do that. So it's good to have had a very specific date of August the 4th pinned down in the Martian Chronicles so that we could hang our celebrations on that. But today being August the 22nd, we celebrate Ray Bradbury and his great stories. Thanks for watching. Thanks for listening if you're listening to the audio version of this. I don't know what you'll make of this without the pictures, but hey-ho, it's your choice. And I'll see you next time on Bradbury 100.